The natural life of Númenor. Of men and beasts. It would appear that neither elves nor men had dwelt in this island before the coming of the Edain. Beasts and birds had no fear of men, and the relations of men and animals remained more friendly in Númenor than anywhere else in the world. It is said that even those that the Númenorians classed as predatory, by which they meant those that would at need raid their crops and tame cattle, remained on honorable terms with the newcomers, seeking their food so far as they could in the wild, and showing no hostility to men, save at times of declared war, when after due warning the husbandman would, as a necessity, hunt the predatory birds and beasts to reduce their numbers within limits. As has been said, it is not easy to discover what were the beasts and birds and fishes that already inhabited the island before the coming of the Edain, and what were brought in by them. The same is also true of the plants. Neither are the names which the Númenorians gave to animals and plants always easy to equate with or relate to the names of those found in Middle-earth. Many, though given in apparently Quenya or Sindarin forms, are not found in the Elvish or human tongues of Middle-earth. This is partly due, no doubt, to the fact that the animals and plants of Númenor, though similar and related to those of the mainlands, were different in variety and seemed to require new names. As for the major animals, it is clear that there were none of the canine or related kinds. There were certainly no hounds or dogs, all of which were imported. There were no wolves. There were wild cats, the most hostile and untamable of the animals, but no large felines. There were a great number, however, of foxes or related animals. Their chief food seems to have been animals which the Númenorians called Lepodi. These existed in large numbers and multiplied swiftly and were voracious herbivores, so that the foxes were esteemed as the best and most natural way of keeping them in order, and foxes were seldom hunted or molested. In return, or because the food supply was otherwise abundant, the foxes seem never to have acquired the habit of preying upon the domestic fowl of the Númenorians. The Lepodi would appear to have been rabbits, animals which had been quite unknown before in the northwestern regions of Middle-earth. The Númenorians did not esteem them as food and were content to leave them to the foxes. Of bears and men. There were bears in considerable numbers in the mountainous or rocky parts, both of a black and brown variety. The great black bears were found mostly in the Forostar. The relations of the bears and men were strange. From the first, the bears exhibited friendship and curiosity toward the newcomers, and these feelings were returned. At no time was there any hostility between men and bears, though at mating times and during the first youth of their cubs, they could be angry and dangerous if disturbed. The Númenorians did not disturb them except by mischance. Very few Númenorians were ever killed by bears, and these mishaps were not regarded as reasons for war upon the whole race. Many of the bears were quite tame. They never dwelt in or near the homes of men, but they would often visit them, in the casual manner of one householder calling upon another. At such times, they were often offered honey to their delight. Only an occasional bad bear ever raided the tame hives. Most strange of all were the bear dances. The black bears especially, had curious dances of their own, but these seem to have become improved and elaborated by the instruction of men. At times, the bears will perform dances for the entertainment of their human friends. The most famous was the Great Bear Dance, Roxale of Tompale in the Forostar, to which every year in the autumn many would come from all parts of the island, since it occurred not long after the Eruhantale, at which a great concourse was assembled. To those not accustomed to the bears, the slow but dignified motions of the bears, sometimes as many as 50 or more together, appeared astonishing and comic. But it was understood by all admitted to the spectacle that there should be no open laughter. The laughter of men was a sound that the bears could not understand. It alarmed and angered them. Of beasts of the woods, fields, and coasts. The woods of Númenor abounded in squirrels, mostly red, but some dark brown or black. These were all unafraid and readily tamed. The women of Númenor were specially fond of them. Often they would live in trees near a homestead and would come when invited into the house. In the short rivers and streams there were otters. Badgers were numerous. There were wild black swine in the woods, and in the west of the Númenor, at the coming of the Edain, were herds of wild kinds, some white, some black. Deer were abundant on the grasslands and in and about the forest eaves, red and fallow, and in the hills were roe deer. But all seemed to have been somewhat smaller of stature than their kin in Middle-earth. In the southern region there were beavers. The animals named Akelli seemed to have been urchins or hedgehogs of large size, with long black quills. They were numerous in some parts, and treated with friendship, for they lived mostly upon worms and insects. There seemed to have been wild goats in the island, but whether the small horned sheep, which were one of the varieties of sheep kind that the Númenóreans kept, were native or imported, is not known. A small kind of horse, smaller than a donkey, black or dark brown, with flowing mane and tail, and sturdy rather than swift, is said to have been found in the Númenor by the settlers. They were soon tamed, but throve and were well tended and loved. They were much used in the farms, and children used them for riding. Many other beasts there were no doubt that are seldom named, since they did not generally concern men. All must have been named and described in the books of lore that perished. About the coast, seals were abundant, especially in the north and west, and there were also many smaller animals not often mentioned, such as mice and voles, or small preying beasts such as weasels. Hares are named, and other animals of uncertain kind, some that were not squirrels but lived in trees, and were shy, not of men only, others that ran on the ground and burrowed, small and fat, but were neither rats nor rabbits. In the south there were some land tortoises, of no great size, and also some small freshwater creatures of turtle kind, of sea-water and freshwater fish. Sea fish were abundant all about the coasts of the island, and those that were good to eat were much used. Other beasts of the sea there were also off the shores, whales and narwhal, dolphins and porpoises, which the Númenóreans did not confuse with fish, lingui, but classed with fish as nearly all those that lived wholly in the water and bred in the sea. Sharks the Númenóreans saw only upon their voyages, for whether by the grace of the Valar, as the Númenóreans said, or for other cause, they did not ever come near the shores of the island. Of inland fish we hear little. Of those that live in the sea partly, but enter the rivers at times, there was salmon in the Serial, and also in the Ninduniae, the river that flowed into the sea at Eldalande, and on its way made the small lake of Nisinian, one of the few at Númenor, about 3 miles inland. It was so called because of the abundance of sweet-smelling shrubs and flowers that grew on its banks. Eels were abundant in the meres and marshes about the lower course of the Serial. Of birds, the birds of Númenor were beyond count, from the great eagles down to the tiny Curinki that were no bigger than wrens, but all scarlet, with high piping voices, the sounds of which were on the edge of human hearing. The eagles were of several kinds, but all were held sacred to Manwe, and were never molested nor shot, not until the days of evil and the hatred of the Valar began. Not until then did they on their part molest men or prey on their beasts. From the days of Elros until the time of Tar Ankalimon, the 14th king of Númenor, son of Tar Tanamir, some 2,000 years, there was an eyrie of golden eagles in the summit of the tower of the king's palace in Armanelos. There one pair ever dwelt and lived on the bounty of the king. The birds that dwell near the sea, and swim or dive in it, and live upon fish, abode in Númenor in multitudes beyond reckoning. They were never killed or molested by intent by the Númenóreans, and were wholly friendly to them. Mariners said that were they blind they would know that their ship was drawing near home because of the great clamor of the shore birds. When any ship approached the land, seabirds in great flocks would arise and fly above it for no purpose but welcome and gladness. Some would accompany the ships on their voyages, even those that went to Middle-earth. Inland the birds were not so numerous, but were nonetheless abundant. Some beside the eagles were birds of prey, such as the hawks and falcons of many kinds. There were ravens, especially in the north, and about the land other birds of their kin that live in flocks, daws and crows, and about the sea cliffs many choves. Smaller songbirds with fair voices abounded in the fields, in the reedy meres, and in the woods. Many were little different from those of the lands from which the Edain came. But the birds of finch kind were more varied and numerous, and sweeter voiced. There were some of small size, all white, some all gray, and others all golden, that sang with great joy in long thrilling cadences through the spring and early summer. They had little fear of the Edain, who loved them. The caging of songbirds was thought an unkind deed, nor was it necessary, for those that were tame, that is, who attached themselves of free will to a homestead, would for generations dwell near the same house, singing upon its roof or on the sills, or even in the solmar or chambers of those that welcomed them. The birds that dwelt in cages were, for the most part, reared from young whose parents died by mischance or were slain by birds of prey, but even they were mostly free to go and come if they would. Nightingales were found, though nowhere very abundant, in most parts of Númenor save the north. In the northern parts there were large white owls, but no other birds of this race. Of trees and plants. Of the native trees and plants, little is recorded, though some trees were brought in seed or scion from Middle-earth, and others, as has been said, came from Erisea. There seems to have been an abundance of timber when the Edain landed. Of trees already known, to them it is said that they missed the hornbeam, the small maple, and the flowering chestnut, but found others that were new to them, the wych elm, the holm oak, tall maples, and the sweet chestnut. In the Hierostar they found also walnuts, and the laurinke, in which they delighted for its flowers, for it had no other use. This name they gave it, Golden Rain, because of this long, hanging clusters of yellow flowers, and some who had heard from the Eldar of Laurelin, the golden tree of Valinor, believed that it came from the great tree, being brought in seed thither by the Eldar, but it was not so. Wild apple, cherry, and pear also grew in Númenor, but those that they grew in their orchards came from Middle-earth, gifts from the Eldar. In the Hierostar the vine grew wild, but the grapevines of the Númenóreans seem also to have come from the Eldar. Of the many plants and flowers of field and wood little is now recorded or remembered, but old songs speak often of the lilies, the many kinds of which, some small, some tall and fair, some single-bloomed, some hung with many bells and trumpets, and all fragrant, were the delight of the Edain. Of the flora of Eldalande the Green, the haven at the center of the Bay Eldana, it is recorded. All about that place, up the seaward slopes and far into the land, grew the evergreen and fragrant trees that they brought out of the west, and so throve there that the Eldar said that almost it was fair as a haven in Erisea. They were the greatest delight of Númenor, and they were remembered in many songs long after they had perished forever, for few ever flowered east of the land of gift. Oyolare and Larilose, Nesamelda, Rodariana, Taniculaceae and Yavanamire with its rose-like flowers englobed and scarlet fruits. Flower, leaf, and rind of those trees exuded sweet scents, and all that country was full of blended fragrance. Therefore it was called Númenór, the fragrant trees. Many of them were planted and grew, though far less abundantly, in other regions of Númenor, but only here grew the mighty golden tree Malinorne, reaching after 5 centuries a height scarce less than it achieved in Erisea itself. Its bark was silver and smooth, and its boughs somewhat upswept after the manner of the beech, but it never grew save with a single trunk. Its leaves, like those of the beech but greater, were pale green. Above and beneath were silver glistening in the sun. In the autumn they did not fall, but turned to pale gold. In the spring it bore golden blossom in clusters, like a cherry, which bloomed on during the summer, and as soon as the flowers opened the leaves fell, so that through spring and summer a grove of Malinorne was carpeted and roofed with gold, but its pillars were of grey silver. Long after these times, in the Third Age, Legolas the elf uses similar words when speaking to the remnant of the Fellowship of the Ring of the elven realm of Celeborn and Galadriel. "There lie the woods of Lothlorien," said Legolas. "That is the fairest of all the dwellings of my people. There are no trees like the trees of that land, for in the autumn their leaves fall not, but turn to gold. Not till the spring comes and the new green opens do they fall, and then the boughs are laden with yellow flowers. And the floor of the wood is golden, and golden is the roof, and its pillars are of silver, for the bark of the trees is smooth and gray. So still our songs in Mirkwood say, my heart would be glad if I were beneath the eaves of that wood and it were springtime." The relationship between the trees of the Golden Wood and the Malinorne of Númenor is chronicled thus. Its fruit was a nut with a silver shell, and some were given as gift by Tar Eldarion, the 6th king of Númenor, to King Gil-galad of Lindon. They did not take root in that land, but Gil-galad gave some to his kinswoman Galadriel, and under her power they grew and flourished in the guarded land of Lothlorien beside the river Anduin, until the High Elves at last left Middle-earth, but they did not reach the height or girth of the great groves of Númenor. Of the beasts and birds of the Edain. To the land the Edain brought many things from Middle-earth, sheep and kine and horses and dogs, fruiting trees and grain. Waterfowl such as birds of duck kind or geese they found before them, but others they brought also and blended with the native races. Geese and ducks were domestic fowls on their farms, and there also they kept multitudes of doves or pigeons in great houses or dovecotes, many for their eggs. Hen fowl they had not known, and found none in the island, though soon after the great voyages began, mariners brought back cocks and hens from the southern and eastern lands, and they throve in Númenor, where many of them escaped and lived in the wild, though harried by the foxes.